The world was like a black whirlpool of nothingness, but when the goddess granted her light, continents were formed and the 9 races were created. Among them, the Dragonborn, the Elves, the Oni, Dwarves, Demons, Dark Elves, Centaurs, Beastfolk, and finally, humans. In a peaceful village, a young boy bids farewell to his family to begin his journey far from home, chasing the dream of becoming a great adventurer and giving his relatives a better life. Upon arriving in the city, the boy had his first shock of reality, for in that place everyone lived in a rush and without patience unlike him. Soon after, when presenting himself at the local adventurers guild, the young boy introduces himself as Light in order to register. For that, the clerk asks what his gift is, and he reveals unlimited gacha. When he presses the gacha button, a card comes out, and Light can summon the item described on it. For example, he summons a fork. Although the object appears completely bent, to avoid embarrassment, the boy tries twice more with a card of an apple and another of bread. But the fruit came out spoiled and the bread was moldy. The poor boy tries to argue that his gift is usually better than that, but not very convinced, the receptionist gives him a guild identification of Class F. Since he has no other choice, Light accepts it willingly and asks about available jobs. The woman points to a board where the easiest tasks are listed. But considering that the illiteracy rate in that region was very high, Light was also a victim of it. He couldn't read. After confirming this with the boy, the woman points out a few jobs he could do. Very basic manual tasks like collecting wood and transporting goods. Thus, even though they were low-paying jobs, Light rolled up his sleeves and worked hard, giving his all to do the best he could. His reward came at night when, exhausted, the young man collected his payment, a small pouch with coins of little value, which showed that even after working the whole day, he might not even be able to feed himself properly with what he had earned. To make matters worse, a group of beastfolk decided to pick on the poor boy, knocking him to the ground and stealing his money. As if that weren't enough, even though people had witnessed what happened, they acted indifferently, even telling him to get out of the way, as if he were nothing more than garbage thrown in the street. However, not everyone seemed so bad. To the boy's surprise, beside that group, a beautiful elf stepped forward and reached out her hand to the human. She even knelt on the ground and gave him a hug, something he never imagined he would experience one day. An elf dirtying her knees to show affection for him. Light thought he was dreaming, but the woman assured him that it was very real. Her group was called the Concord of Tribes, and each member represented one of the 9 races born from the goddess's light. The beastman was Garu. The elf was Sasha, Draco, the Dragonborn, Diablo, a demon, Abaro, an Oni, Nano, a dwarf, Sion, a dark elf, and Santor, a centaur. However, one race was still missing to complete the group, and they wanted Light to be the last member representing humans so that together they could fight against discrimination and make the world a more equal place. Of course, Light would not miss such an opportunity, so he accepted immediately and joined the team. Still, keeping up with such a powerful group of adventurers was not easy at all. As the days went by, Light had to face terribly strong creatures, and since he was the weakest link, he often had to be protected by his companions, usually by Sasha, who always made sure to keep the young human safe whenever possible. In fact, because of this overprotective behavior, she became the target of teasing from her friends, who said she was always putting the boy under her wing. She swore that she only tried to keep him from getting hurt because, if something were to happen to him, it could damage the group's reputation. Indeed, although he was not a fighter, Light was useful in carrying the allies' belongings, and he also made incredible tea during their breaks between adventures. This helped him earn his companions' trust. Later, at a certain point inside the dungeon, the leader, Draco, asked everyone to stop walking, for according to him that place was perfect for what they were about to do, since it was practically a dead end. The atmosphere grew heavy, and tension could be seen on the face of every member of the group except for Light, who, innocent as he was, thought it was just a rest stop and began setting things up to prepare tea. However, Draco revealed the real reason they were there. The young human was being expelled from the group. Light could not believe what he was hearing and couldn't understand the reason for such a sudden decision, since everyone seemed to like him and he had always done his job properly. Even Sasha, who had always shown affection toward him, now acted with deep contempt, impatient with the boy's inability to grasp why this was happening. In any case, it was the opinion shared by all. The human was nothing but dead weight. and now they would be free of the foul stench of his race. In disbelief, Light asked why they had included him in the group in the first place. They explained that their superiors believed the boy might be a master because of the gift he possessed. That's why Light had been under observation the entire time for them to study him more carefully. But the conclusion was clear. Light had the normal status of a human, meaning he was not a master. That made him immediately useless to the Concord of Tribes. And, on that note, Sasha even celebrated, since her mission was to continue the bloodline of the master. And fortunately, she would not have to marry an inferior race like the humans. Anyway, the adventurer's superiors ordered that the boy be killed, and that's why they brought him to this alley, where they could take his life without raising suspicion. To carry out the order, the beastman, Garu, showed his steel claws, which would be used to shatter the innocent target. With a strike directly to Light's face, blood began to flow, and with that, the boy was certain they really were going to kill him here and now. The human's survival instinct, of course, made him run desperately for his life. Then Sasha shot an arrow that pierced his leg badly, cutting short his attempt to escape and leaving the boy completely surrendered to death. Not giving up, Light crawled across the ground as Garu approached. Every second, as he cried, the child screamed that he didn't want to die. But this show of vulnerability only increased the beastman's desire to finish him off. And since he was so riled up, Garu decided to torture the boy before taking his life. However, by chance, Light hit the jackpot when he accidentally triggered a teleport trap planted in the ground. His enemy even tried to stop him from being teleported, but Light managed to escape successfully and was now safe. Or rather, at least for the moment. Because from what it seemed, the place he ended up in was deep within the dungeon, where incredibly powerful beasts were certainly lurking and could show themselves at any time. Knowing he was going to die, Light cried and said goodbye to his family in his mind, since he would not have the chance to do it in person. Given over to fate, the poor boy was abandoned by his friends, or rather, by those he thought were his friends. They had always shown respect and affection for him, making him happy during the time they had adventured together. In the end, all that talk of equality between races was nothing but nonsense, and his former companions revealed themselves to be people of the worst kind. Even so, Light didn't throw in the towel. After everything he had suffered because of them, he promised to kill them all, one by one, carrying out the revenge that would one day come. In this case, Light would first need to deal with the Hellhound Serpent that had just appeared in the cave, a level 1000 creature the human had no chance of defeating. Now, even though he was infinitely weaker than the monster in every way, the boy couldn't simply be devoured without at least putting up some kind of resistance. With no weapon in hand, all Light had was his much criticized gift, Unlimited Gacha. From that moment on, all his hopes had to be placed on this ability, and whatever the goddess willed would happen. So he pressed the button on the item and released a card. Then, a woman was summoned and, swearing to protect her master, she annihilated the Hellhound Serpent with unbelievable ease. Wearing her maid outfit after resolving the situation, the woman apologized for not preventing the boy's injuries, but in any case, she was able to heal every single wound he had suffered, even the arrow to his leg, simply by placing her hand near his body and releasing a faint green energy. Always speaking with strange formality, full of difficult words, the maid asked if her master could reveal his name. When she learned it, she began calling the child Lord Light. In turn, she promised to serve the boy under any circumstance, even if she had to sacrifice her own life, swearing eternal and unconditional loyalty. The mysterious figure introduced herself as May, the ever-seeking maid, an extremely rare level 9999 card that had been summoned through Light's ability, Unlimited Gacha. Then, May used her appraisal technique to analyze the young boy's status. What she saw were several layers of protection and a potential she already knew her master possessed, because her experienced eyes could see far beyond what the simple sight of an ordinary person could. According to the maid, Unlimited Gacha was far from useless. The truth was that, no matter what everyone thought, this gift had a trick that few knew. Its power was influenced by the mana flow of the place where the item was activated. The greater and stronger the flow, the greater the gacha's strength. In this case, as was obvious, May could only be summoned because Light had ended up in the depths of the dungeon to do it, where the energy was powerful. She was sure the boy had done this on purpose. Without much pride, the boy admitted he had landed there by chance, fleeing after being coldly abandoned by those he swore were his friends. Remembering his recent trauma, the boy couldn't hold back his tears and showed himself completely vulnerable in the face of such a terrible experience. Showing empathy, May gave the child an almost maternal hug and, even though she admitted she didn't fully understand the depth of his suffering, she made it clear she was willing to use all her power to seek the vengeance her master so desperately longed for. Now, for that to happen, all Light had to do was give the order. Light, however, refused to accept such overwhelming help. After all, he wanted to carry out his revenge with his own hands, no matter how impossible it seemed with his current strength. In fact, Light was certain May didn't see any possibility of that happening. But, on the contrary, she showed total support for this decision and made herself available to assist her master in whatever way necessary, emphasizing that she hadn't been lying when she said she would dedicate her life to standing by young Light's side. And so, in the depths of the abyss, the toughest dungeon in the region, knowing the power of unlimited gacha, Light pressed the button on the object once more so that he could build a kingdom that would help him carry out his revenge. From that moment on, that chamber of darkness began to be enveloped in a true flood of light. 3 years later, in that same depth of the abyss, Light had already developed a huge kingdom. In the corridor leading to the throne, he came across dozens and dozens of maids, properly uniformed, who were not only 100% dedicated to the daily tasks of the castle, but some girls in particular, like a certain quartet, ended up developing a certain obsession with their master, and, along with that, even went too far at times. When they saw the young leader walking down the corridor, they made it quite clear how badly they wanted to smell the scent of the soles of his feet. Annoyed by such absurd attention, May offered to silence the maids, but the king saw nothing wrong with a bit of admiration from his servants. As he walked through the streets of the city, Light noticed how much the population had grown over these 3 years. Wherever he went, the ruler was loved and respected by everyone, seen as someone who met the people's needs and truly cared about them. By the way, Light asked how the other 3 cards he had summoned for the kingdom were doing, so May gave her report. Ayuki was reviewing the perimeter and making maps of the area. Light thought that was great, since the forest surrounding the kingdom was full of monsters, and that wouldn't be a problem for a tamer like her. May wasn't so sure, as Aoyuki was as unstable as a cat, but the master wouldn't think anything different of her. As for Ellie, she had been working hard to develop new spells that matched the plan Light wanted to put into action. Nazuna, lastly, was patrolling the castle as usual, since she was only good at hand-to-hand combat and wasn't very smart. Truth be told, about that, Light said that at least the girl was funny, which was enough reason to want to keep her around. Then, Light arrived at a door where Jack was waiting. The man treated the king in the most informal way possible, which irritated May, who had already told him to address their leader properly. However, Light himself made it clear that he didn't mind, since he saw Jack as an older brother. Having said that, the man teased the maid in a playful, take that kind of way. Finally, the two went to their usual training, and Light took off his gloves so he wouldn't go easy on his opponent. After all, he wasn't known as Blood Barricade for nothing. Living up to his nickname, he took a heavy punch to the pit of his stomach, a blow that would surely destroy an ordinary person, but he completely resisted the attack and started trading blows with his master. Meanwhile, the clumsy Nazuna patrolled the vast and endless corridors of the castle with her usual cheerful and carefree posture, making even the perverted quartet of maids wonder if she was really working or just taking a walk. When the warrior said she was doing an extremely important task for the king, the 4 maids took the opportunity to ask for a very special favor that, supposedly, had everything to do with what the patrol girl was doing. After praising her endlessly, they took advantage of her innocence to ask her to go to a very special place that needed a brave warrior to inspect it. That said, off went Nazuna to the place they mentioned. When she knocked on the door, May answered and asked what the warrior was doing in Light's room. The short girl said she was there for her routine patrol, and even though May tried to explain that she was responsible for that area and that Nazuna should go somewhere else, the stubborn girl simply ignored her and entered the king's room without permission. Inside, she even complimented the chief maid on how clean everything was, but then commented that the bed looked like someone had been rolling around on it for 2 hours with their face buried in the pillow. In response, May made up an excuse, saying it was a new style of arrangement she had developed during her years as a maid, and that only someone well-trained like her could do the same. Impressed, Nazuna pulled out a letter the quartet had written. She wasn't supposed to show it, but since the warrior wasn't very smart, she ended up reading it out loud. Down with May and her monopoly over Master Light's room. We demand that everyone have the right to clean this place. Vote yes to remove the tyrannical head maid. Get wrecked. Upon hearing that, May assured Nazuna that she would personally take care of the matter, then gave her a few coins as a way to reward her for her incredible service. Overjoyed, and taking advantage of the fact that new sweets had arrived in the market, The warrior wasted no time and went to a food stall to spend her money on treats like dorayaki and milk. After that, she went to see Ayuki on one of the castle's balconies just to check what she was doing. The tamer only replied with meows that more or less indicated her answers through body language. Even though Nazuna didn't understand exactly what she meant like light, did she try to interpret it as best she could. Talkative as ever, the warrior kept bothering her companion, saying she could help with her mission to make maps of the forest. She could even cut down trees to make the path easier, although it wouldn't really be a forest anymore without trees. She also said that if the tamer had come across any huge, dangerous monster and didn't know how to deal with it, Nazuna could have easily taken care of it herself. After all, even though she was summoned after Ayumi, she saw herself as an older sister who could handle anything. Fed up, the tamer replied that she hadn't found any monsters and had just come to return the part of the map she'd already drawn. Giving her companion a few pats on the back harder than necessary, Nazuna said she should have just said that from the start, then said goodbye and went back to her patrol. That means she went all the way to the throne room and let out an ear-piercing scream just to make sure no one was around. That way, she could finally drop her professional facade and fangirl over the master's throne with her unstoppable desire to be near him in person. But since that wasn't possible, she settled for rubbing herself against the king's seat like there was no tomorrow. By the way, in the middle of all that uncontrollable excitement, she ends up snapping the wing off a little angel statue that was part of the throne's decoration. When she realizes what she's done, she hurriedly sticks the thing back in place as best as she can, then bolts out of the room like a kid caught doing something bad. Meanwhile, Jack finishes the day's training and invites the leader to take a bath to refresh both mind and body. Once there, the instructor praises his apprentice, telling him he surpassed the level of anyone living in this kingdom, even most of those who dwell on the surface. Most of them, that is, not all. Light knows that very well, and he's eager to keep training to finally put his revenge into motion because his former teammates are all up there on the surface. In the meantime, after the mess they made Nazuna go through, the maid quartet is summoned by Mei for proper punishment. They pretend not to know why they're all there, so the head maid reads aloud every single word from the letter they wrote and forced Nazuna to say. The four of them grumble that they should have never let that airhead handle something so important, but now it's too late. The chief demands an explanation, but none of them can justify it, especially after the offensive words that were aimed at Mei herself. On top of that, the head maid finds it shameful that they were too cowardly to say those things themselves, forcing someone else to do it. So, as punishment, they'll have to clean the entire corridor leading to the throne room alone, and by hand. The punished girls protest, calling it absurd and impossible task. But as Mei says, one step at a time, just like when you reach level 500. With that, she informs them that she'll be heading on a mission to the surface by order of Master Light, and she expects everyone to behave and work properly while she's away. Back at the market, Nazuna has her face pressed against a shop window, mesmerized by a wicked-looking gauntlet with built-in blades. Ellie shows up and asks if the warrior is searching for sweets, and Nazuna takes the chance to ask why the mage isn't out inspecting something like she was supposed to. The mage replies that, obviously, things were so peaceful, she even got some free time, otherwise she wouldn't be there. Then she adds, calling Nazuna a dimwit. Annoyed, the warrior fires back that she's not a dimwit after all, she's just learned her multiplication tables. Ellie sighs and comments that there truly are no limits to the swordswoman's stupidity. That's when the argument starts, and the sorceress plays her trump card. She spent an entire day with Master Light recently, they even had tea together. Next time, she might even invite him to a private dinner with some evening entertainment. Nazuna bursts with outrage. She's never even had the chance to share a cup of tea with the master. But if there's going to be some night entertainment and it's dangerous to go out after dark, she offers to tag along and protect them with her close combat skills, since the mage is totally useless in that kind of fight. Feeling unexpectedly appreciated, Nazuna cheerfully heads off to resume her patrol, leaving Ellie alone, shaking her head, thinking, what a character that girl is. After being punished, the maids still grumble about it. After all, isn't it fair to rebel against tyrannical leaders? But they quickly give up, realizing they don't stand a chance against Mei. She's practically untouchable, being the master's very first summoned. Truth be told, even though they're being punished, nothing could extinguish their burning desire to do unspeakable things with the king's bedsheets, things that can't be described here. or the video would get demonetized. To say something without saying too much, let's just say it involves the tongue being used as a method of linen cleaning. Caught up in their own gossip, the four of them start venting again about their chief. She's always buried in work, but never lets anyone else clean Light's room. Totally unfair. And, of course, they're insanely jealous that May was the first one summoned and got to spend 3 whole months alone with the master before the second letter was ever called. In their minds, deep within the shadowy dungeons, the first maid had every opportunity to get cozy with the boy, and even imagining that scene makes the quartet tear their hair out in frustration. In a desperate move, they decide to turn their hatred into a curse against the head maid, so they start chanting the word die over and over again. Just then, passing by on her way to the surface mission, May, hearing those very words being aimed at her, walks right into the room in the flesh, demanding to know what the hell is going on. With nowhere to run, the 4 troublemakers scramble to flatter her, insisting they're 100% focused on following her orders and that their loyalty is as strong as a dog's devotion. But May just repeats the word die 3 times, the same evil chant they'd been using to curse her. Not that she owed them an explanation, but during those 3 months she spent alone with Light, all he ever did was study books. There was 0 time for the perverted acts the girls had been fantasizing about all this time. In fact, whether by coincidence or not, May had just been thinking she might have gone too hard on their punishment. She was even considering reducing it. But now, seeing this, she realizes she was absolutely right all along. Actually, the 4 of them deserve even more punishment. From now on, they won't just clean the corridor, they'll clean the entire throne room. From that moment on, the quartet was forced to finally get to work for real. And the first thing they did after their boss's departure was start cleaning. In the middle of the cleaning, one of them dropped the angel's wing that Nezuna had broken and fixed back in place. And the general feeling was that the 4 of them were completely doomed. On the other hand, Nezuna was feeling fulfilled. After keeping the kingdom safe for another day, she took off her armor and lay down on the bed to rest a bit. Even so, she felt she might have the chance to see her master more often, just like Ellie. In general, she only patrolled the castle daily, but she would love to go on an intriguing mission on the surface, where she could defeat a giant monster, prove her worth, and gain the king's complete trust. Speaking of which, all she hoped for was to see Master Light tomorrow. When morning came, Light gathered Nezuna, Ellie, and Ayumi at the kingdom's gate. As always, the mage and the warrior were fighting, until Nezuna stopped everything she was doing to celebrate the king's arrival, since she had wished to see him before going to sleep. Ellie replied that His Majesty would never stop his duties to meet a brainless girl like Nezuna, while Ayumi rubbed herself against the leader like a cat. Not knowing how else to deal with the tamer, Light patted the girl's head, which caused some jealousy between the 2 quarrelers. Setting that aside, a hellhound suddenly appeared in the abyss, and Light felt an uncontrollable shiver because of the trauma he had suffered 3 years ago with that same creature. In any case, he was not alone. At the slightest sign of danger that the master was in, the 3 summoned cards changed their lazy attitude to a focused and frightening expression. Together, the 3 of them promised to pulverize the monster without the slightest remorse for presenting a threat to their master. The aura of that trio was so oppressive that the hellhound turned into a stray street dog. It lowered its tail, its snout, and lay down on the ground to formally show submission. Because of that, curiously, despite his trauma, Light felt pity for the creature, and even approached to gently pat its snout. Ellie asked the reason for the meeting, so the leader informed them that he had received a message from May saying that the prey had taken the bait. Therefore, it was time to put the plan into action. After 3 long years, Light counted on all his companions to begin his revenge. Meanwhile, in Akray, the city of wolves, within the Federation of Beastmen, Garou walked through the streets and was recognized by the people as a sort of popular leader. Of course, Garou loves flattery. He never turns down a bit of bootlicking. As the crowd bows before the wolf, he spots a human child digging through the trash. Without a second thought, he throws the kid to the ground, spits in his face, and growls for him to stay away. Later, Garou heads to a tavern with his pack of brown-nosing subordinates, each one acting as if their leader were some kind of god on earth. One of them makes a point of saying that the wolf rose from a slum orphan to become the chief of all wolf men, and the others chime in that they wish they could be just like him. To reach that level, Garou teaches, you must learn to use your beastly instincts in the best way possible. His underlings are convinced that no one in the world has the same talent as their boss. Garou adds that the secret lies in sniffing out the best jobs and knowing how to tell them apart from the bad ones. One of the thugs brings up that job from 3 years ago, the one with the Concord of Tribes, but Garou waves it off, saying he can't reveal anything about that mission. It's a national secret, or so he claims. Inside, though, the wolf loves to recall how sweet that mission was, how he got to toy with that human brat suspected of being a master. They never heard from the kid again after he vanished into that teleportation trap, but Garou is certain the boy never survived, wherever he ended up. Still, there are other masters left to hunt. For now, though, Garou prefers not to dig through the trash. He'll let the mutt sleep for a while. So, he calls for another drink, but the one who appears before him is May. In the next scene, Garou is seen leading the woman deep into a cavern, accompanied by a handful of his men. She looks exhausted, and he reflects on how it took him an entire month to bring her there. Back on the day they met at the tavern, May recognized Garou as a member of the Concord of Tribes. She introduced herself as a servant who had sworn loyalty to Lord Light. Garou's eyes widened at that name. The maid explained that she had been researching her master's origins for some time and had discovered that Light carried noble blood. Garou was sure it was a lie, yet the woman said she couldn't reveal more. Even so, Garou couldn't help thinking that the higher-ups should have investigated that kid more thoroughly, because even if it was a lie, it could also be true. Still, he kept insisting it was nonsense. May then said she had traveled the entire world searching for Lord Light's past and had recently learned that he joined a group of adventurers. That's why she begged Garou to take her to the last place where Light was seen alive, and as a reward, she revealed 3 gold bars that left every beast man around speechless. Garou considered the situation. The smell of a trap was strong, yet she was just a human woman, no real threat to them. Thinking that, he accepted the deal. Not for the money, of course, but because, as he put it, Light had once been a dear companion. He promised to gather his strongest men to explore the abyss. Now, thinking back, it all seemed too good to be true. Garou could barely wait to enjoy himself with that human body once they were deep inside the labyrinth. He led May straight to the very spot where he and the Concord tribe had once brought Light to end him for good. The wolf explained that a monster had ambushed the boy, and wounded, Light had crawled into a teleportation trap, never to be seen again. May fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face, praying for her fallen master. While the cynical wolf muttered that there had been nothing anyone could have done, behind her, his men quietly closed off the exit, slowly cornering the human maid. At that moment, May spoke. She said how terrible it must have been for Light to be betrayed and tortured by scum who had sworn to be his friends, in a place as filthy and dark as this. If only she had been by his side from the start, things would have been different. The boy wouldn't have been struck by an arrow, slaughtered, and left covered in blood. Hearing that, Garou jumped back, panic flashing in his eyes. Only the members of the Concord tribe and a few national leaders knew those details. The wolf accused her of being a spy, but May declared she had sworn loyalty to Lord Light and no one else, and that such an accusation was an insult to her honor as a servant. Therefore, Garou should now see the color of his own entrails. With those words, May unleashed a pressure so intense that everyone began trembling in fear, including Garou, who couldn't even move. All his life, he'd seen human women as weak, easy prey he could dominate at will. But this was different. May radiated an aura so fierce that the air itself seemed to swirl like a storm around her. That's when the wolf realized he was going to die. But before she could strike, a hooded figure appeared in the chamber, unrecognizable at first. Lord Light himself had arrived. He reminded his servant that Garou was his prey. The beast men couldn't believe a single human had made it that far into the abyss. Then Light removed his hood. The sight of his face left Garou speechless. The young man smiled and said he had come for revenge 3 years later. The wolf laughed at the idea. After all, that brat was still just a level 15 human, while he himself stood above level 150. Garou had no clue how the kid survived, but he was glad he did, because killing him again and bringing his corpse back to the chiefs would make Garou the greatest of all beast men. Light imagined the wolf had many questions about what had happened, and Garou admitted he did. He even said that weird woman had scared the hell out of him, but in the end, they were just humans, completely harmless. Even his weakest subordinates were above level 130, while Light was a mere kid with a pathetic gift who must have survived by sheer luck, probably saved by that woman, or something like that. To show that there was no escape anymore, Garou ordered his men to go after the boy. 2 of them rushed ahead but were easily decapitated by Mei, who crossed the entire place at a speed invisible to the eye, taking down the enemies and vowing that none of the beastmen would leave the abyss unpunished. Light thanked her for the help and asked the maid to block the exit, and she promised that not a single soul would leave that place alive. Garou's subordinates were shocked by their comrades' deaths, but Garou told them to keep their eyes open, since it had been just a lucky surprise attack. Still, he claimed their group would never lose to an inferior race. Light commented that the wolf really hadn't changed that way of thinking, and asked if Garou had ever considered that maybe his race was actually the weakest there, showing his level status of 158. The wolf said that was ridiculous, since humans were creatures of low strength and mana. Light replied that every race has a level limit, and that's the main reason why humans have always suffered discrimination. Garou told the kid to stop that talk after all. They were simply born better than humans. But Light asked, if that's so, then why were the only heads on the ground those of beastmen? That provocation intensified the enemy's anger, and their movements showed that another attack could happen at any moment. And that's exactly what happened. They all attacked Light at once, who calmly responded by striking each one of them with his staff. After being hit so hard, Garou was thrown back and lost his breath. As Light approached, the wolf still couldn't believe that a mere human was capable of doing all that. With difficulty, he stood up and refused to be humiliated that way. After all, Garou was the leader of the wolfmen and couldn't burn his reputation like that. To raise the level of the fight, he drew a magic orb to summon the magical beast Fenrir. When he threw the item on the ground, an explosion of energy occurred, and soon a gigantic level 500 wolf appeared. Garou smiled from ear to ear, certain he would crush that human. But Light sighed, regretting that such a giant was so weak. To make the fight more exciting, he dropped his staff and spread his arms open, promising not to move. That provocation only increased the wolfman's rage, who swore not to leave a single bone of that arrogant kid intact. Then he ordered Fenrir to launch the beast's roar explosion, a surreal power that hit Light directly. Garou was sure the boy couldn't have survived such a concentrated mana explosion from a level 500 creature. However, Mei seemed strangely calm while guarding the exit. When the smoke cleared, Garou's jaw dropped to his chest. Light was absolutely unharmed. According to the boy, that attack had a name full of big talk for a power that only kicked up a bit of dust. Around them, the henchmen started to panic at that unbelievable sight, while the human announced it was his turn now. He added that it was a shame they called that mutt Fenrir, and then drew a card that would show his opponents the true primal wolf god, an ultra-rare being of level 9000. Without delay, Light ordered Fenrir to take down the mutt, and with a single icy breath, he froze the beast summoned by Garou. Seconds later, the ice shattered into several pieces, each carrying a different part of the creature's body. From that moment on, all traces of arrogance disappeared from Garou's face. After all, his level 500 monster had been defeated with just one breath. Light said that even he could have finished off that beast, but since he didn't want to stay just on words, he decided to show his level in practice. So, when his human status level 999 was revealed, Garou trembled in fear at what his eyes refused to believe. The beastman couldn't understand how that was possible, since, theoretically, the level limit for humans was only 100. On top of that, Garou pointed out that Light should have grown in those 3 years that had passed. Then the boy explained he stopped growing because he used the Bracelet of Youth. Also, he would never forget the despair, sadness, and anger he felt on the day he was betrayed. Given the facts, Garou no longer had arguments left. There was nothing to do but accept the death he now knew was coming. However, against all expectations, the leader of the Wolfmen dropped his arrogance and kneeled, begging for forgiveness. He justified himself by saying he was only following his country's orders and never wanted to do any of that. As if that wasn't enough, he blamed the henchmen behind him, saying the idea had been theirs. While they revolted at his cowardice, the leader admitted he had betrayed Light, but with a ridiculously gentle voice, he reminded him that they had shared many good moments together. Ignoring the wolf's plea, the human ordered him to tell everything he knew about the masters. Garou answered that his superiors only told him to go after them, but he had no idea why. If that was so, Light wanted to understand why they still tried to kill him, even after discovering he wasn't a master. Once again, Garou swore he didn't know anything. Then Mei asked the henchmen if they knew something. They all firmly claimed they had information to reveal, but the maid sliced them all with steel wires, punishing each of the enemies with death for lying to Lord Light. After that, Light asked if Garou agreed that they would win if they went to war against the nations on the surface. But before hearing the answer, he made it clear that May could see the truth through her eyes of judgment, trembling and urinating on the floor in fear. The wolf said Lord Light was indeed very strong and might have a temporary advantage in that battle. However, no matter what level he was still only one person against entire countries armed with powerful equipment and items. Satisfied with the answer, Light replied that he had been thinking pretty much the same thing, and since he still had more questions to ask the wolfman, the human demanded that he come along. Without saying another word, Light activated a teleportation spell and disappeared from there together with Garou. When the wolf realizes it, he's standing in a gigantic throne room where hundreds of soldiers, maids, and magical creatures bow before their sovereign, Lord Light. Garou is left speechless as he watches that boy climb the steps to the throne. Once seated, Light orders everyone to raise their heads and display their status. At that moment, we see that the magical beasts have levels around 8,000. While other types of units range around 7,000. The regular infantry soldiers are level 1,500. While Light's personal subordinates Mei, Ayuki, Ellie, and Nizuna are all at the maximum level, 9,999. After revealing that he spent the last 3 years building this army, Light asks Garou once again whether he would win if he went to war against the nations on the surface. Seeing the wolfman's inexplicable look of terror, Light takes that as a satisfying answer. As a reward, the king declares he will impose upon his enemy an endless state of despair, a suffering far worse than death. Unable to take his eyes off the boy, Garou comes to the conclusion that he and his companions were the ones who created this monster, who now sits invincible on his throne as if he were some kind of lord of destruction. With tears in his eyes, the lupine asks if the human intends to become a god, and Light admits that it's not a bad idea. The real question is for what purpose, since he could become either a benevolent god or a merciless one. With his gift, he could spread happiness and prosperity throughout the world as easily as death and despair. In the end, he wishes for the world itself to decide what kind of god he will become. Speaking of which, Light announces that it's time to mobilize his forces and march toward the surface from the shadows into the light. Some time later, after a trip to his homeland, Light received the worst news he could ever imagine. When he arrived at the land where he was born and raised, he noticed that everything had been completely destroyed by some unknown force, refusing to accept that his family had been wiped out. The Dungeon King mobilized his troops to collect the corpses and pay tribute to the dead, but since the bodies of his relatives had not been found, there was still hope that they might be alive. Despite the delicate moment, not everyone was emotionally involved in that tragedy. Gold, a knight in golden armor, for example, tried to hurry his master to leave the place as soon as possible. After all, he didn't want to be stuck in a camp on his very first day. Nemumu scolded the big guy for acting like a spoiled child at a time when the king was mourning, and Light once again wondered whether those two were allies or enemies, considering how much they argued. Always with an impeccable and rather old-fashioned vocabulary, Gold replied that there was nothing more unpleasant than a lady with a crow's voice yelling in his ear day after day. Besides, he was sure she preferred sleeping in the warmth of his bed rather than in the cold of the night. The assassin replied that she would even sleep in the mud of a swamp for her master. And Gold countered that his loyalty to his master shone as brightly as gold, and it was no coincidence that his nickname was the Auric Knight. But that was exactly why he preferred marching to an inn as soon as possible, so that Light wouldn't have to sleep in the cold. In the end, Nemumu gave in and agreed with the big guy, while the king reminded them both that the focus now was to gather information about the kingdoms surrounding that area. Even though his forces were strong enough to defeat the rest of the world, it would be unwise to start attacking recklessly without knowing anything about the enemies. Gold agreed, because, as he said, know your enemy as you know yourself, and you will not fear the result of 100 battles. Light added that maybe the annihilation of his village was related to the fact that he was considered a master, whatever that meant. But if everything that meant power in that society inevitably led to death and destruction, then he would rather turn that world into hell himself. When he said that, a visible aura of hatred surrounded the young man's body, and Gold asked him to calm down before someone got hurt for no reason. Promising to behave, Light summoned the Fool's Mask through a card and put it on. On the way, as the trio flew toward the city of Dagas, Nemumu asked what business her master had there. Light reminded her that he should always be called Dark while they were outside the abyss, because if he used his real name, he would become an easy target for the Concord of Tribes. Speaking of which, he planned to register at the guild under that false name and climb the ranks to gain prestige, and, with it, access to privileged information. A bit later, the three got close to Daga's and decided to continue on foot to avoid drawing attention. Soon after, they found a man and his son being robbed in the forest by a gang of dwarves. At first, Dark and his companions didn't get involved in the fight, but the shining golden armor of gold reflected the light and caught the bandits' attention, forcing the knight and the assassin to take action. The two immobilized the criminals without any difficulty, thus saving the father and son, who, grateful, offered the heroes a ride to Daga's. The two were impressed by the trio's strength and asked if they were some kind of super strong adventurers. Dark explained that they were just ordinary people who wanted to become adventurers, and that was exactly why they were going to Daga's, to register at the guild. The coachman was surprised but said they were heading to the right place, since Daga's was the southernmost city in the Dwarven Kingdom, located on the border with the Human Kingdom to the east and the Elven Kingdom to the west. And even though there were many disputes among the countries, the quality of Daga's dungeon was very high and continued to attract many adventurers, making the region prosperous. There were even many humans in the city, which allowed him to open an inn to host that race. A few minutes later, they reached the gate of Daga's. The innkeeper introduced himself as Colonel and invited the travelers to spend a night in his inn for free as a token of gratitude. Thus, the dungeon trio continued their journey toward the guild. As they walked through the city, they were amazed by its size and beauty, especially Gold and Nemamu, who had never seen anything beyond the depths of the cave where they were born. Daga's, unlike the underworld, was full of life and trade, with shop after shop selling battle equipment to meet the strong demand of adventurers coming from all corners of the continent. Besides exploring the famous dungeon of the region, they also relied on the dwarves' mastery when it came to forging. A little farther ahead, the three reached the guild, and surprisingly, there were almost only humans inside. Everyone stepped aside as the trio of outsiders advanced, which made Dark assume that the humans were afraid because they were mistreated by other races in that place. When it was time to register, Nemamu made a scene with the receptionist in front of everyone, arguing that Lord Dark could never humiliate himself by registering as a rank F adventurer, even though every beginner was required to start at that level. In her opinion, her master should not only be rank SS, he deserved a level made just for him, like SSS or something like that. Embarrassed by his servant's behavior, Dark himself apologized for her attitude and gladly accepted the rank given to him. After realizing her mistake, already outside, Nemamu apologized in every way possible for the way she had acted in the guild. Later, the new adventurers of Daga's went to Colonel's Inn, and Lord Dark asked to rent the entire upper floor of the hotel for a full month, as long as no employee went upstairs during that period. That said, the man places a bag full of gold coins on the counter, making the eyes of the shop owner shine, who had only expected to grant a free night to his saviors, but ended up hitting his entire monthly goal in a single stroke. With the deal closed, the king of the underworld summons cards that grant total silence to his allies, as well as prevent their detection, which reassures the group for a safer stay, far from trouble. In turn, Nemamu asks if it wouldn't be right for the master to simply send his subordinates to carry out the missions instead of participating personally, since that way he could get hurt. Upon hearing this, Dark releases such great anger that he practically breaks some objects around him. After all, he felt particularly questioned about the validity of his long-desired revenge, realizing she might have gone too far. Nemamu bitterly regrets it, and, on her knees, once again asks for forgiveness for her intrusion. But the boy pulls himself together and apologizes for his exaggerated reaction, because he knows well that the girl only said that because she was worried about his safety. But unfortunately, bad feelings took over him. Even so, to demonstrate her unshakable loyalty, the assassin kisses her master's foot, a gesture known to show obedience, even though Dark does not like it very much. Seeing the scene, Gold calls Nemamu a pervert and provokes another fight between the two. After leaving the hotel, the group goes to Daga's dungeon, and, passing through the popular market, they draw everyone's attention, whether because of Gold's armor, Nemamu's beauty, or Dark's mask. Because of that, the boy recognizes that the mask fits him perfectly. But without a doubt, it is not a good accessory if you want to be invisible in the crowd. When they reach the line, they notice there are no elves, and Dark explains that this is due to the fact that elves and dwarves are in a dispute to see who dominates this dungeon. Grabbing the boy from behind, Nemamu comments on how wise her master is, He asks if she really needs to act like that, and she assures him that yes, because it is very important to protect the king's back. In the middle of this, some rough-looking adventurers simply cut the line shamelessly, and nothing happens. By the size of the weapon, one of them is hiding under a cloth. Dark imagines that these guys are not weak at all. However, since they are not fools either, the Abyss trio goes to the line cutters to make it very clear that they are in the wrong. The man with the giant sword asks if the brat knows who he is talking to, but his companion next to him reminds him that it would not be wise to start a fight in this place, because if the sword is used now, it would probably cause chaos. Understanding the situation, the sword bearer swallows his pride and lets it go for now, going with his allies to the end of the line. After expelling the bullies, Dark and his companions are revered by the other adventurers who were also waiting in line, especially by the group of 4 young men who were behind the line cutters and did not have the courage to face them. Completely clueless, one of the boys, named Gimra, asks if the big guy's armor is really made of gold. His companions scold him for his shamelessness, but the truth is that everyone around was curious for an answer, as Gimra himself knew. Finding the situation funny, Gold was about to answer the question, but Nemamu steps in front of him to say that the armor is fake, and that it makes no sense to build protection as soft as gold. Gimra was about to ask an even more inconvenient question, but is silenced by his friends, while Dark explains that gold uses that color to symbolize his dedication to the Knight's Code. Changing the subject, one of the boys asks if it is the trio's first time in this dungeon. Since this cave is gigantic compared to the others, it is common for adventurers to sleep inside instead of leaving. And since the foreigners have no baggage, the boy decided to ask. When the group of young men is called to enter the dungeon, Dark's group discusses whether they should get backpacks just to pretend they are carrying something, because the magical items they use as inventory might raise suspicion. Be that as it may, the 3 go inside the dungeon, and once again Nemamu and Gold are impressed by the difference between this one and the only dungeon they had ever seen in their lives, the Abyss. Dark reminds them that their goal is to discover the secret behind this dungeon, even though not even Ellie was able to unravel this mystery, which makes this mission practically impossible. From what he learned, dungeons are full of mana, and the level of this magical energy rises as they go deeper. This power can be used to create monsters and traps, as well as countless other things. Upon coming across a vast field inside that dungeon, Dark points out that each labyrinth is a world in itself, completely different from the surface. Then, he summons the cards of lightness, concealment, and clairvoyance, so that he and his companions could fly to cut through the path, while staying hidden in the air and having a privileged view of the surroundings. Meanwhile, on the surface, the arrogant warrior with his huge sword annihilates several monsters along the way, with an expression of hatred stamped on his face. After slaughtering the enemies, he announces himself as the youngest and most brilliant elite white knight of the Kingdom of the Elves. His name is Kaido, the legendary hero with Master's blood. His companion asks Kaido to calm down, since their priority is the trolls on the 3rd floor. But the White Knight tells Yanok to shut up, because his real priority is to face those bastards who challenged him. All because of his level 1500, which is still too low. Yanok argues that the White Knight's level is very high among elves, but that is far from enough for Kaido, who, with his master's blood, sees himself as superior to everyone and wants his strength to match that. Filled with hatred, the elf promises to level up until he becomes strong enough to crush all the swine who ever insulted him. Yanok understands his comrade's suffering, since he himself was exiled by brainless fools who lacked the ability to understand his research. Anyway, this research will one day bear fruit, and its results will be seen on Kaido's own body, who will gain the strength he so deeply desires. Hearing that, although he tolerates an alliance with that madman for the sake of this research, Kaido doesn't trust that dark elf in the slightest. Back to the Abyss group, they indeed reached the 3rd floor and wiped out all the trolls. Once that was done, Dark announced that they should collect the magic gems to prove to the guild that they had truly descended to that level of the dungeon. Since the battle left the king completely filthy, he preferred to return to the surface and take a good bath. Nemamu, of course, promised to leave every part of her master perfectly clean, even though no one mentioned it. Gold refused her help, claiming that his armor was as beautiful and shiny as always. Without delay, the trio returned to the 1st floor with Dark's strength leading the team. As they flew through the skies of that magical cavern, the The sunset was so beautiful that Gold wished he could keep flying forever. Suddenly, the Abyss warriors noticed the presence of the same group of youngsters they had met earlier in the line for the dungeon, now in danger. Facing a small horde of goblins, 3 of them held the front line with melee weapons, while the last one supported with magic. After defeating their opponents, they were startled by the sudden appearance of Dark, Gold, and Nemamu. Dark, with his staff impaled into the body of a snake, said it was important to always stay focused on the enemy during a fight, but they should never leave their rear unguarded. Even if a snake bite like that wouldn't kill them, it could still paralyze them for a short while, which could be fatal in a place like this. The leader of the quartet recognized that Mia had been in danger in that situation, putting the whole team at risk. Because of that, he humbly thanked Dark for the advice. In the midst of all this, a pack of great bush wolves appeared, somehow wandering into this part of the dungeon instead of the depths of the forest, where they actually belonged. However, the pack wasn't attacking the humans. They were fleeing from something greater that was tearing through the trees in its path. And finally, before Dark and the others, appeared a huge quad-blade mantis, a gigantic praying mantis with a disturbing appearance. The rookie leader doesn't understand how this could be happening, since that species was supposed to have been exterminated 10 years ago. He tells Mia to attack with magic to throw the mantis off balance and buy them time to escape. But since the kids want to run away, Black asks to hunt the creature with his group. Gold says that a hit from that thing must really hurt, and Nemamu guesses it must be around level 500. The boys' leader thinks fighting that thing is a death sentence and that the only way out is to get away as fast as possible. But Gold charges at the insect and starts a duel against it. After realizing it wouldn't be easy to get close to the enemy in melee, Dark casts fire arrows to attack from a distance, but the quad-blade mantis reflects the flames back at the caster, almost causing serious damage. The rookie quartet is sure this is the end, so the leader asks Mia to use another spell. But the girl is completely amazed that the hooded sorcerer can cast attack magic without chanting, and she can't understand how no one else seems to care about it. Her companion doesn't know what that means, but he knows they need to react quickly. Laughing at the situation, Gold promises to teach the boys how a knight should wield his weapons on the battlefield, which basically means attacking with the sword and defending with the shield. For example, when attacked, the Golden Knight raises his shield and completely breaks the mantis's claw. Then, teaching the boys step by step how to succeed, he explains that after destabilizing the opponent, you must strike with your sword at the right moment, since battles are always about technique and creativity. Dark follows up with more fire arrows. The mantis reflects them again, but this time they recalculate their trajectory and hit the insect's back, taking full control of the projectiles. The mage is able to manipulate the fight as he pleases. Mia is stunned that this guy can control 30 fire arrows at once, while Dark destroys the mantis's other claw and decides to finish the fight once and for all. However, realizing it's about to die, the insect itself turns around and tries to flee as fast as it can. Dark acknowledges the monster's intelligence in trying to escape, but today isn't its lucky day. With a wall of fire card, the gacha player raises a barrier that blocks its escape, leaving Mia even more impressed by what she's seeing. The quad-blade mantis spreads its wings to fly away, so Nemamu leaps into action with a huge jump. As she approaches the target, she strikes a blow that shatters the mantis into pieces. The assassin strikes a victory pose to receive applause from the group, but Gold complains that she ruined the best parts of the monster, and now they can't sell it anymore, driving the woman into despair, while Dark forgives his subordinate. The rookie quartet wonders who these people even are. Shortly after, Gimra finds the magic gem of the quad-blade mantis, and Dark sees it as a chance for them to level up. The boys' leader asks if the trio is part of some famous S-rank adventurer group or something like that, but Dark says they're all rank F, which blows the kid's mind. Mia conjures a water sphere so the adventurers can wash their hands. Gold says his armor is still clean and shiny as always, while Dark humbly thanks her kindness and washes up. The rookie leader replies that they owe them much more than that for all the help they received. So since night is falling and the place could get dangerous, he invites the trio to camp with them for the night in the forest, even though they only have a simple tent and basic food to offer. He also admits that Mia's dying to talk to Dark about magic, which is written all over her face, so everyone gathers to spend the night together. After setting up the camp and lighting a fire, they sit down to eat. Hearing Dark's story, Mia realizes that the boy's talent comes from his parents, who were also sorcerers. The boy praises her abilities, but she sees herself as far from good enough. since she can't cast spells without chanting, much less tactical class ones. Her brother admits he's confused, since he doesn't understand why that's so important. So she explains impatiently that there are 3 classes of spells. Combat spells, such as Fire Arrow and Ice Blade, are effective against a single target, while tactical spells are useful for hitting a much larger area. Finally, strategic spells are powerful enough to cause a global impact like tsunamis, earthquakes, and meteors, but they require a whole group of mages accumulating mana and reciting chants to cast them. For draconids, elves, dark elves, and demons, casting advanced spells is easy, but not for humans. Even so, this guy Dark goes against everything that's ever been said and simply does what no other human has ever been able to do before, which certainly makes him not just epic, but legendary. Gold and Nemamu completely agree, while the boy looks visibly embarrassed. Likewise, the girl's brother forces a nervous smile and asks her to tone it down a bit. He admits he doesn't know much about spells, but he can confidently say that Lord Dark is a good person. He also points out that Mia is talented enough to earn a recommendation to the Magic Academy of the Duchy, and that she'll surely be able to cast tactical class spells one day. Dark remembers that the Duchy is the nation created by all races, the Principality of the Nine, and Gold guesses that the girl must be incredibly gifted to have been invited to the most prestigious magic academy in the world. Her brother explains that they lost their parents during an epidemic, so she never had the means to attend, and that's why they formed an adventure group with their childhood friends Gimra and Wordy to make a living. Despite everything, the team's goal is to earn enough money by exploring dungeons to fund Mia's admission to the Magic Academy of the Duchy. Mia feels honored to have such valuable friends by her side, but she asks them not to do anything crazy just to help her with that. Dark observes the beautiful relationship between the siblings, which reminds him of his own little sister. With that in mind, he points out that the group will be able to achieve their goals, especially after seeing how talented Mia is. Embarrassed, the girl thanks him for the compliment, while her brother asks what made the trio want to become adventurers. With his head down, Dark says that his parents died in a fire. Nemamu adds that this incident left Lord Dark with terrible burns, and now they need to find a potion strong enough to heal those wounds, while Gold completes by saying that they owe a lot to that boy's parents, and that's why they are traveling with him. Inconvenient and impulsive as always, Gimra asks if Gold and Nemamu are some kind of item, or if they are a couple. The assassin replies that she would never go out with a yellow can, and the knight says that he's only interested in mature maidens who can recognize his golden aura. Since the girl is single, Gimra invites her out, but the woman says that her heart belongs exclusively to Lord Dark. Meanwhile, even in the middle of the night, Kaido keeps active and takes down a gigantic ogre in the forest. Yanok praises his companion's victory, but Kaido believes that his sword, Grandius, is a legendary weapon of prestige, meaning it shouldn't be wasted on vermin like that. Yanok insists that collecting some parts of these monsters is important for his research, because that way he'll one day be able to surpass the growth limit imposed on each race. The next step is to obtain the primary material for the research, humans. About that, Kaido can't wait to begin the hunt. Days later, the guild receptionist is delighted with the amount of gems Dark brought, and the woman's excitement was such that it drew the attention of all the adventurers, who started whispering about that extraordinary feat mainly because rumors had already spread that they were the group responsible for defeating a quad-voice mantis, which earned them the nickname Black Motley. Nemamu explains that that's why she had said Lord Dark deserved an S rank right from the start. Ignoring the woman, the receptionist promises a premium meal for the mage while he waits for the sale to be completed. After they leave the guild, Gold jokes that that little bird must be singing a sweeter melody after today, while Nemamu remains angry because no one gives her master the recognition he deserves. As they walk through the streets, the three are recognized as the ones responsible for killing a quad-voice mantis, to the point that 2 men approach them to ask if they really are the Black Motley, since that's how everyone is calling them. Nemamu steps in front of her master and asks what the strangers want with him, but the men promise they don't want any trouble and introduce themselves as Suvalin and Gilbert. Suvalin explains that, from what he's heard, Dark and his companions killed a mantis and managed to reach the 5th floor of the dungeon. Gilbert says that's an exaggeration, since it took the 2 of them years to not even get close to that. So Nemamu brings her knife close to the man's neck and asks if he's calling Lord Dark a liar. While he tries to explain, Gold wants to know what they want. Suvalin says they're just trying to be nice, and that many humans in the city have greatly admired the Black Motley, since their feat proves that humans can compete with other races. In fact, it would be great if Dark and his companions could teach a lesson to those who think otherwise and put them in their proper place. In the middle of this, the rest of the men's group calls them for an activity, so Suvalin and Gilbert leave. After hearing those guys' words, people from other races comment among themselves about how humans always say the stupidest things, and that this talk about having defeated a quad-voice mantis is probably pure lies, since it's easier for Palmeiras to win a world championship than for a human to cast a tactical spell without an incantation. Not really caring about that widespread gossip, Dark and his companions fly toward the Dagger Dungeon in search of the 5th floor, but on the way they meet the boys' group, so they land to talk with them, since it's been a few days since they last spoke. According to their leader, it's a great time for them to show up, since Mia has something to deliver. Full of embarrassment, as a way of thanking them for everything, the mage gives Dark an ointment for burns that she learned to make from her grandmother before she passed away. It's not something that will make the scars disappear, but it will certainly help with the pain. In return, the boy draws a card from which he conjures a bracelet to give to the girl, which makes her just as grateful as he is. At night, flying toward their destination, Nemomo asks if it was really a good idea for her master to give Mia an ultra-rare wish bracelet, since it doesn't seem like a fair trade for a bit of ointment. About that, Dark thinks the accessory looked great on the girl. Gold points out that that item can grant small miracles if the user's wish is strong enough, and believes his master chose that bracelet carefully for the girl, which is the attitude of a true gentleman. Because of that, he teases Nemomo, saying she should be less materialistic and more spiritual. When they arrive at the 5th floor of the dungeon, Dark sends his 2 companions to hunt the Yetis they need, then activates a teleportation card to return to the Abyss Throne Room, where he is happily welcomed by his elite warriors. Later, while being served tea by May, the master is asked how things are going, and he replies that it has been great being an adventurer for a change of pace, to make some friends and see more of the world. He asks if there's any news regarding the revenge plan, and Ellie assures him that everything will be in order soon. Satisfied with the mage, the master praises her and also keeps May in charge of the abyss during his absence. When he says that Aoyuki must continue scouting the ancient forest, Nazuna excitedly asks what she should do. Knowing that she's too clumsy to deal with complex plans, the boss only asks her to keep everyone safe in the meantime. Once everything is ready, Dark can hardly wait to enjoy the miserable face of Sasha. At night, in the Dungeon of Daggers, while the other companions sleep, Suvalin and Gilbert find it strange that the 3rd floor is so bright, since it's usually covered in mist. Changing the subject, Suvalin asks what his partner thinks about the Black Motley, knowing that the masked man, according to rumors, defeated the quadrivoice mantis with tactical magic without using any incantation. If that's true, Gilbert believes that magician might be a legendary knight or an ancient hero reincarnated. Suvalin really hopes that's the case, since humans need a champion to raise the morale of their race, as they are deeply despised by society. Having said that, he leaves to take a leak. When he returns, the man finds Gilbert's head cut off on the ground, killed by Kaido the elf with the enormous sword, who also slaughtered the rest of the group. With each moment, the elf despised humans as if they were insects not even worth the time it takes to kill them, since they were in a swamp, such a wet and sticky terrain. Suvalin thinks his friends should have heard the enemy's arrival. But the strangest thing is that Gilbert's head was taken off without any sign of struggle, which makes him believe that the elf must have used some kind of special magic to provoke an uncontrolled reaction from the human. Kaido stomps on Gilbert's head several times, but given the situation, Suvalin realizes that this enemy is far too much for him. So he plans to escape and report what happened to the Adventurers Guild. With that in mind, he throws a smoke bomb and runs, trusting the advantage of not being seen in a territory he knows like the palm of his hand. However, to his surprise, the man is hit by something and falls to the ground with a wound on his forehead. When he looks back, he sees Kaido floating on a magic platform, while Yanok suddenly appears and strikes his back with his staff, knocking him out. Yanok points out how cowardly that human was for running away after seeing his friends dead, and also complains that Kaido killed all of them except one, which is far from enough for their research, since every experiment can only be completed through countless failures. In other words, he will need many more people. Kaido promises to be more careful next time, but warns in advance that he will exterminate any human who dares to raise a sword against him. Excited about the future, Yanok is eager to show humans the only role that worms like them can play in the great theater of life. The next day, Nimumu dumps all the magic stones they obtained and once again demands that Lord Dark's rank be increased immediately. Trembling for her life, the receptionist replies that it's not possible, especially after the guild already approved a double promotion from rank F to D. The assassin insists that her master doesn't need to follow the local laws, and that not even rank S is enough to reflect his greatness. Not knowing how to deal with the woman's anger, the employee suggests that Dark accomplish another great feat. Thus, the boy goes to the inn with a mission poster that involves hunting down adventurer killers who target humans. He and Gold are certain that this job will get them promoted. But Nimumu points out that they don't even know the criminals' identities and have little more than a few clues. Gold asks if one of the master's letters couldn't help, but he explains that they appear randomly and don't always help. Nimumu thinks it's a good idea to ask the Abyss for help to expand the search, but the conversation is interrupted when the trio sees a portal opening in the middle of the room. Mia comes out of the portal and almost falls to the ground. If not for Dark catching her, the girl was injured, unconscious, and her bracelet had just snapped. So she is immediately laid on a bed and healed. Dark uses a hypnosis spell to enter the girl's mind and see what happened to her. One day, while Mia and her companions were camping in the forest, another group approached them to warn about adventurer hunters who target humans and seem to be extremely strong. Because of that, the group was leaving right away and recommended that the kids do the same. Faced with the situation, Mia's brother decided to leave. Quickly, they packed their things to depart, but everyone was already too tired from the earlier adventure and couldn't walk as fast. Because of that, the sun set before they had covered even half the way, which ended up resulting in the worst thing that could happen. Suddenly, the group of kids was found by Kaido and Yanok, innocent. Mia thought they didn't know what was happening in the forest, so she asked her brother to warn them about the adventurer hunters in the region. Hearing that, the elves regretted not having hidden their traces better, saying that the rumor explained the absence of humans in the area, and that's exactly why they couldn't lose the opportunity to do what needed to be done with that group of brats. When Kaido drew his sword, the three boys told Mia to run while they bought some time, which obviously sounded like an insult to the ears of a level 1 in 500 white knight. Even so, Mia's brother charged at the enemy, but was easily struck by a powerful vertical blow to his stomach. Gimra and Wordy attacked right after, but they too were easily knocked down with similar blows. Mia fell into total despair upon witnessing that scene, while Wordy, still alive, gathered his strength to lift his body and tell her to run as fast as she could. In an act of courage, Gimra also managed to get back into the fight, so the two of them went against the elf again. Annoyed by the kid's persistence, he delivered a sword strike twice as strong as the previous one, finishing the boys off for good. Yanok complained that once again his companion had killed the humans, which prevented them from being used in the research. Kaido reminded him that he would crush anyone who opposed him, and that there was still one little girl left. Yanok pointed out that mages were certainly rare, but that those three boys would also have been very useful, promising to go easier next time. Kaido decided to use Mia before she was taken for the experiments, so Yanok, who didn't share the same desire, decided to step aside. Approaching the little girl, the elf asked why she looked so scared, since she would have the privilege of being used by a future legendary hero. In fact, he thought she should be jumping for joy. In the middle of that, Mia's brother tried to get up again and told her to run away, happy to see that one of his test subjects had survived. Yanok told his companion to capture the brat. The brave adventurer knew very well that he wouldn't survive his wounds, but at least he could use his last breath to save his sister. Once again, he told Mia to run, and this time she finally did. Kaido turned to chase the girl, but had to deal with her brother, who pushed himself to attack the elf. Yanok repeated that he wasn't supposed to kill the boy, and Kaido grumbled that it was harder than it looked. The human, for his part, said that fighting was about using your head to surprise your enemies. Remembering Gold's words, he repeated that you must block with the shield and strike with the sword, but always using your head to think. Drawing energy from deep within his soul, the boy deceived his opponent with his sword and used the shield to knock him to the ground. When he fell, Kaido couldn't believe what had just happened, and the hatred he felt for that brat reached its peak. Because of that, he unleashed an ability with his sword Grandius that pierced through the boy's torso, leaving him impaled in the middle of the field. Yanok stopped his companion from attacking the kid again and told him to go after the girl who had escaped if she revealed their identities to the guild. They were done for. Thus, Kaido reached Mia without delay by using the same Grandius ability as a board and energy beam with impressive consistency. Tired of these rats, the elf didn't want to play tag anymore, so he announced that it was time to teach that brat how to behave before a future legendary hero. Mia couldn't understand how that guy had caught up so fast, and he explained that the ability to clone his sword several times and control those copies at will was one of the powers of the legendary Phantom class weapon, the national treasure of the Elven Kingdom, Grandius. In short, he could reach any insect he wanted without the slightest difficulty. Mia, in turn, shows great courage and promises herself that she will not waste the time her friends managed to buy with their own blood. She fires ice spears, which are easily destroyed by Grandius, and when she tries to run, she is taken down by the elf, ending up with an injured leg. Kaido orders the girl to surrender to the future legendary hero. But Mia says that this guy will never be a hero, that this is a name you only give to people who are strong and kind, like Lord Dark, and that Kaido is nothing but a cowardly bully. Hearing that, Kaido remembers when he was mocked for thinking he was superior only in front of those weaker than him, and for being kicked out of the White Knights, probably because he had already reached his maximum level and still wasn't good enough. Raising the stakes, Mia even calls him a failure, and he, now overflowing with deep hatred, fires several beams in the girl's direction. As those projectiles fly toward her, Mia tries to use her last trick to tell Dark what's happening. After finding out what happened to the girl, Dark announces that it's time to leave. Meanwhile, in the forest, Yanok struggles to heal Mia's brother, since the boy is practically dead. When Kaido reappears, he asks where the girl is, and his partner confesses that he only came back because he thought the brat had returned to her friends. The scientist gets furious because someone who used to be a white knight allowed himself to be fooled by a little girl that age. Kaido then says that the brat simply disappeared, probably using some teleportation item or something like that. Given the circumstances, Yanok fears that their activity will reach the ears of the Elven Kingdom, and that they will find out Kaido stole Grandius. Kaido starts to panic at the thought that the commander of the White Knights might come after the sword. Yanok points out that this officer is level 3000. While his subordinates are around 2,000, and all of them possess weapons as powerful as Grandius. Kaido begins to lose his mind at the possibility of being hunted by those guys. But the scientist tries to calm him down, saying the research can still be completed, which will allow the former White Knight to surpass his level limit. But for that, they have to leave that place as soon as possible. At that moment, Dark appears, saying he won't allow that to happen. Kaido realizes he didn't even sense this man's approach, despite being level 1500, and he imagines what kind of level Dark must be at. While Dark closes Gimra and Wordy's eyes, Gold arrives carrying Aleo in his arms and says that the boy is still breathing. After healing the kid, Dark asks why those poor boys had to face such a cruel fate, since, in this world full of discrimination, all they did was work hard without bothering anyone to make Mia's dream come true. Dark imagines that her wish is impossible, but he thinks that maybe one day, under different circumstances, they could have been friends, and that's why he will never forgive the two elves who committed this atrocity. Yanok lies, saying the human is mistaken, because he was the one who took care of that boy while he was dying and saved his life. However, Dark says he's with the girl they were chasing, but he tells the elves to relax, since he didn't tell the guild anything. Because of that, feeling like the luckiest man in the world, Kaido bursts into laughter and fills himself with confidence, since now all he has to do is kill these opponents, and the problem will be solved, and soon he will become a legendary hero. Dark asks if that hero talk is supposed to be funny, since the only reason he didn't tell the guild about the elves was so they could become his prey to make them suffer even more than they made those kids suffer, to the point they'll wish they had never been born. Speaking of which, the boy tells Gold and Nemamu not to get involved in the fight, then walks toward the enemies. Kaido asks why the brat is looking at him like that, since that's no way for an insect to look at him. Consumed by uncontrollable rage, the elf attacks, promising to rip the skin off his rival. However, Dark easily blocks the sequence of blows and responds by striking the opponent's stomach firmly with his staff. Having done that, Dark mocks him, asking if that's all the legendary hero can do. Even more enraged, Kaido awakens the power of Grandius to launch several clones of the sword, imbued with all kinds of magic from ice to fire, while Dark dodges the attacks and defends against a well-coordinated strike from Kaido. Yanok can hardly believe that a mere human is fighting like that against an elf wielding a phantom-class sword, acting like a spoiled kid, stomping his foot on the ground. Kaido says that Dark is cheating, because although he claimed to be a mage, it's clear he's actually a fighter, and that's exactly why he hates humans. After all, there's no mage capable of fighting Kaido at the level he's at. Gold comments that the guy couldn't be more wrong, while Nemomu, trying to classify her master, says that the closest thing to Dark would probably be something like an unlimited card mage. Finally, Dark conjures a rain of ice swords, and Kaido is shocked that the kid didn't even need to cast an incantation. Even so, he sends the Grandius clones toward the target, who responds by making the ice rain fall, destroying the enemy's copies. Yanok's eyes widen at the unbelievable ability of that human, who's simply showing he has more mana than an elven mage. Still hoping he can win, Kaido tries every possible way to hit his opponent with his sword clones, even attempting surprise attacks from behind, but the human mage's defense is flawless. He doesn't even need to move. The ice swords alone are enough to shield his body from any attempt to harm him. Because of that, Kaido starts to freak out, refusing to accept in any way that this is happening to him. After all, he's a legendary hero who's having a hard time against a simple human. Even so, he promises that he won't lose, since he holds in his hands the sacred sword Grandius, granted by the heavens to a master from the past. Upon hearing this, Dark's group is shocked. The boy asks what's this story about a master, and if the elf knows who they are. Then Kaido bursts out laughing and answers that not only does he know them, but he's a descendant of theirs, carrying their blood therefore, a sub-master. Actually, in the elf's mind, he makes a point of emphasizing that he's superior to trash like light down to the last drop of blood. Given the situation, Dark announces a change of plans to his subordinates. Take these elves to the abyss and extract as much information from them as possible. Gold and Nemomu get into position for battle, but Yanok mocks the two of them, pretending he's dying of fear, even though he admits that, as a simple researcher, he's no example of battlefield efficiency. Still, since the enemies insist on acting this violently, he feels obliged to ask for a little help. With that said, Yanok snaps his fingers and summons two gigantic monsters fused with humans. One of them is mixed with lizards native to the land of the Dark Elves, while the other is a fusion of men and trolls from that same dungeon. Dark and his companions look at the face stamped on this second monster and realize they know this guy. It's Suvalan, the one they met a few days ago. Yanok boasts about his experience, since it allowed him to exceed the level limit of each species by mixing them. And the only problem is that you need to use a lot of humans just to make this creature walk. In other words, the elf is in need of more test subjects for his research. This is his most noble and sacred duty, a true divine calling. Hearing this, Dark tells the piece of trash to shut up, then orders Nemomu and Gold to release the humans from their suffering, but not to let the elves escape, because they still have many questions to answer. Since the enemies refuse to understand the brilliance of his work, Yanok orders the monsters to attack. However, with just one strike each, Gold and Nemomu defeat the creatures and now promise that the scientist can be next. At that, Yanok laughs, because the opponents actually thought they had won so easily. In reality, the monsters rise again and seem completely ready to return to battle without any significant damage. This time, it's Dark's two companions who have to dodge, nearly taking powerful hits from those huge opponents. At the same time, Kaido focuses on bringing Dark down after everything he went through at his hands in this dungeon. Nemomu, being much faster than her rival, stabs his hand and then his chest. But it seems like it isn't making any difference. Gold teases Nemomu and guarantees he'll finish his own target much more easily. To prove his point, he tries to strike the monster fused with Suvalan, but ends up missing and almost takes a hit in return, which he blocks at the last second with his shield. Yanok grows more confident and begins belittling the enemies, saying they can't win this fight, and if they choose to give up, he promises to be nice when using them as experiments. As time passed and the tension grew, Gold and Nemomu could no longer stand seeing those people suffering so much inside those monsters. To put an end to this once and for all, the assassin activates her certain death ability, and the Golden Knight prepares the Flame of Judgment. Yanok starts laughing at the enemy's new attempt, but quickly loses the smile on his face when he notices that his creations were no longer regenerating as the burning fire consumed them. Getting revenge on the mad scientist, the rogue drives the tip of her boot into the guy's private parts and decides she's buying new boots so she won't have to use this pair that now smells like elven omelet. On the other side of the battlefield, Dark continues dominating his fight against Kaido. Since the elf looks more lost than a dizzy bug under a rain of ice spears, Dark asks whether he wasn't the one who always said he hates when his prey runs away. This time, Kaido has no clever comeback. On the contrary, he's hit by a memory of Elio who, even on the brink of death, had a smile on his face and the confidence that he was doing the right thing. Extremely irritated at being looked down on even by these kids, the former White Knight gathers a large amount of Grandious's power to finally awaken his most powerful ability. Without delay, he unleashes an extremely powerful strike at Dark, who dodges with a leap and notices that the blade is infused with multiple kinds of magic. With every swing Kaido delivers, the sword grows larger and faster, and the blade becomes flexible like a whip, able to extend and retract as it wants, forcing the boy to dodge carefully from that magical tail, although he doesn't have much trouble. Watching the fight from afar, Gold comments that those colors are a spectacle on their own, and Nemamu says this won't work against Lord Dark. While avoiding the attacks, Light admits it's a cool trick, but a cheap one. The provocation fuels the elf's hatred even more, and he starts swinging his sword frantically, hoping to land just one blow on this brat, enough to kill him once and for all. Since that's the case, Light decides to stand still and open his arms, calling the enemy to come at him and giving him the chance to get exactly what he wants. With no hesitation, Kaido raises Grandius and gathers even more power to punish the insolent kid. When the strike lands, an unreal amount of dust rises from the ground, and since Dark hadn't moved, it's reasonable to think the slash hit him. In fact, when the dust settles, it's clear the blow landed squarely, but the sword remains resting on the boy's shoulder as if it hadn't even tickled. Kaido begins to stutter at the unbelievable sight, while Dark invites him to try as many times as he wants. Outraged, Kaido strikes repeatedly, but every attack produces a null, useless result. Tired of the nonsense, Dark breaks Grandius's magic with a single blow and ends the fight with a punch and a kick that send the enemy flying. With that, the gacha player states that he will force out every answer he wants from the elf's mouth, but only after making him beg to die. After all that, Light will kill the enemy without mercy. Upon hearing that, Kaido clenches everything tight inside and begs Lord Dark for forgiveness, arguing that he was a candidate for commander of the White Knights, so he has plenty of privileged information he can hand over easily if he's spared, in addition to giving Grandius to him on a silver platter. Dark asks whether the elf isn't going to keep fighting after bragging so much about being a legendary hero and all that nonsense, since a true hero should continue battling regardless of how difficult the situation is. On the other hand, Ilio, Gimra, and Wordy, those boys did fight until the very end against a much stronger enemy to protect Miya, and they showed an attitude that this arrogant elf never displayed at any moment. Even so, Dark gives Kaido a chance to redeem himself. The two will fight again, and if Kaido manages to land even a single scratch on Light's face, the human will let him go. When he says that, he removes his mask, leaving the elf stunned when he sees who this opponent really was. Completely shaken, Kaido runs away like a coward and is knocked down when Dark drives a solar ray through his thigh. As he approaches the enemy again, the human reinforces Miya's words about this guy. He is no legendary hero at all, he is just trash who even decides to run away after everything. After subduing the opponent, Dark gathers the bodies of the boys who gave their lives for their companion and apologizes to them. Since there are monsters around this dungeon, he will take the bodies and bury the young warriors in the abyss, and also take Ilio back to his sister. Kaido and Yanok ask what will happen to them, and Dark answers that both will be taken together and interrogated. Filled with anger, the human regrets not having done something earlier to prevent those two from hurting his friends, but he overcomes his rage in order to achieve his goal of extracting valuable information from them. Then he summons his teleportation card so they can all return to the abyss. Arriving there instantly, Yanok and Kaido are left in disbelief, since they were just moments ago in the Daga's dungeon. Dark explains that they are now in the deepest level of the abyss, where all of them live. The elves don't understand why these people live in the most difficult dungeon that exists and complain that this place is very far from Daga's. So Nemamu punishes Yanok with a few stomps on his head. The Lord's 4 strongest cards gather to receive their master and ask why these two strange beings are present. Light explains that the pair is guilty of killing countless humans to carry out terrible scientific experiments, and that, apparently, they also have some knowledge about who the masters are, so they will be interrogated until they spill everything. Upon hearing that the elves are responsible for that crime, the girls immediately change their expressions and promise they will inflict the most intense cruelty to make those guys spill every detail if that is the master's will. Unable to take their eyes off those women, Yanok and Kaido feel true terror and imagine that these individuals are on a completely different level of strength. Dark announces that the elves will be killed only after they have given all the necessary information. So it is important that the companions restrain themselves. He then orders Gold to take care of Elio, while Nemamu must help him bury Gimra and Wordy. Out of nowhere, Yanak shouts that he is also a victim of Kaido and begs to be saved, while Kaido accuses the scientist of deceiving him with false promises to commit those crimes. Dark responds that both of them are guilty, and that their disdain for humans was obvious not only in the way they called them insects, but mainly because they had the nerve to kill so many people just to perform their macabre experiments that benefited only themselves. Those people, when they begged to be spared, certainly did not receive mercy from the elves, and now both have the shamelessness to beg for their own lives after all the atrocities they committed. However, if there is one thing that is certain, it is that the two of them will die. Later, Mia wakes up in the inn where she is staying, with Light at her side. The boy tells her that he was in the dungeon searching for the adventurer killers who had chased the girl, but she is only worried about where her companions are. Light shows her her brother in the bed next to hers and assures her he will be fine after being healed and resting. Now, regarding Wordy and Gimra, Light hands her a lock of hair from each of them to deliver the terrible news. With tears in her eyes, Mia thanks her friends for everything they did, and Dark leaves the girl alone so she can mourn in peace. As he wanders through the inn's hallways, he reflects on how he leveled up until he became strong enough to achieve his revenge, but he will never be strong enough to hear the poor girl's cries and not be shaken by it. Finally, the next day, Light returns to the guild and is congratulated for completing such an important mission, which guaranteed his promotion to rank C along with the rest of his group. Dark asks whether they shouldn't have arrested the criminals and brought them to the guild, but the receptionist explains that simply knowing who the culprits were is more than enough for the organization. Besides, the adventurers also saved 2 other colleagues, which is already an excellent bonus. That night, at the inn, after thinking things through with his sister, Elio tells his friends that they will leave tomorrow. Even though they've known their friends for only a short time, the siblings insist on thanking them for everything they did, although they feel nothing could ever repay such help. Starting tomorrow, Elio will stop adventuring and return to his homeland. Mia admits that she was scared after what happened, and the truth is she only felt capable of being an adventurer and exploring dungeons when all her friends were together. Speaking of that, Elio admits he wouldn't feel comfortable continuing this journey without Gimra and Wordy, and he also wants to take their hair back home. As for magic school, Mia will study on her own and promises to become a powerful mage by the time she meets Light and the others again. With a teary expression, she asks if they will see each other again, and Light promises that they will. When the brothers leave the next day, Gold and Nemamu assure their master that those boys will find a new path for their lives and that soon they will all meet again. Thinking to himself, Light plans to take the brothers to visit the graves of their deceased friends once he can finally tell them the whole truth. Finally, he tells his subordinates that he is going back to the Abyss. Without delay, he returns to his domain and is welcomed by May and Ellie, who have information about the interrogation of the elves through a report that is promptly handed over. The two of them explain that they pulled every last piece of information they could from their minds using forbidden magic, and in doing so discovered that the submasters mentioned by Kaido refer to those who carry the blood of the masters and, because of that, have a much easier time leveling up than other people. Furthermore, based on a memory they extracted from a conversation between Kaido and the commander of the White Knights, it is important to mention that the world will likely be destroyed if the masters are left to their own fate. With that in mind, Dark decides to go after this commander to find out more deeply what all of this means. Meanwhile, the maids show their master that Yanak and Kaido are being tortured after the interrogation, since they have already served their purpose and are now nothing more than dead weight. Light draws the Banquet of the Dead card and devours the elves through the appearance of skeletal spirits. Putting that aside, Ellie reports that preparations for the plan are finally complete and that all that remains is for the master to give the order for the revenge against the elf Sasha to begin. The first step will be to capture the White Knights, since all of them are submasters who may hold valuable information. Speaking of which, the vice commander of that organization is Sasha's fiancé, which makes him the perfect lure to find her. Speaking of the lovebirds, Sasha is sitting in a distracted moment beside her beloved Mikhail, bragging about how she once shot an arrow into Light's leg and stopped him from escaping. Mikhail would have loved to see that and points out that, from time to time, it's necessary to destroy some human settlements, because nothing compares to the look they make when they're on the verge of death, an expression absolutely hilarious. Sasha agrees 100% and admits that she can't help laughing in those situations. And then the two talk about how much they love each other. Meanwhile, in the abyss, Light wonders what kind of expression Sasha will have when she starts begging for her life at his feet. The next day, inside a carriage, Sasha was telling an older lady how wonderful Mikhail had been today. The lady replied that the two of them made a perfect couple, and that it made her want to cry just thinking about the elf getting married. Speaking of which, she warned the young woman about her eating habits, because if she ate too much, the wedding dress might not fit on the big day. Suddenly, the carriage came to a stop when a human was thrown into the middle of the street by an elven slaver, who was whipping the poor man so he would work properly. The lady complained that humans couldn't do even the simplest tasks, and Sasha fully agreed. Then, when Sasha casually looked out the window, she thought she saw Light entering an alleyway and, unable to believe her own eyes, decided to follow him herself. She rushed through the alleys of that narrow district, searching for a definitive answer, because in her mind, there was no way that Kid could still be alive. When she reached a dead end, Sasha understood even less where the boy could have gone. For a moment, she thought she had imagined the whole thing, but on the wall in front of her was a poster that read, "Waiting in the Giant Tower," signed Light. When Sasha's maid found her, she was crying in the alley, saying she was going to lose everything in life. Internally, she realized she would lose everything she had gained from killing Light, being adopted by a count, the mansion, the reward money, and even her marriage to Mikhail. At the same time, standing on a rooftop watching the situation, Dark ordered Ellie to act. The sorceress promised to show that traitor true despair, imposing a punishment on her body and soul that went far beyond death itself. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the White Knights, two elves named Enhia and Kia were having fun while torturing a human slave, and another warrior named Sharfat was amusing himself with a human woman who worked as a prostitute. Sharfat commented to the commander about that pathetic guy who used to call himself a hero Kaido, who had formed a duo with a dark elf, stolen the legendary sword, and even become a killer of adventurers, only to be defeated by a human and disappear. The worst part was that their superiors had ordered Sharfat and the others to clean up that mess, which he found completely annoying. Hearing this, another elf stood from the table and questioned how Sharfat could think that way. Since Kaido had been a member of the organization, meaning the responsibility was theirs, Sharfat complained that Must, the most uptight guy of all, just had to speak up, when he himself would much rather be resting his head on the melons of the beautiful young woman in his lap. In the middle of all this, Enhia and Kia pierced the slave's ear and were planning to stab his eye next, until Sharfat asked how long they were going to keep up that nonsense instead of just killing the man already. The pair argued that the slave belonged to them, they had bought him, so they could do whatever they wanted, and at least they weren't womanizing perverts like Sharfat. Must interrupted the argument to remind everyone that they were White Knights, and that humans, on the other hand, were far too weak. Owning one to pass the time was fine, but it was important to remember that the alabaster swords of the White Knights could grant the blessing of salvation. In other words, instead of living their pathetic lives, humans deserved a beautiful and fleeting death. The others insisted that Must's mindset would eventually get him in trouble, but he had no intention of changing. Suddenly, the elven commander demanded silence. At his words, a white pigeon fell dead in the garden, and all the other elves not only shut their mouths, but took on an expression of genuine terror. He ordered Enhia and Kia to stop tormenting their victims so they wouldn't grow rusty. As for Must, he said that this stubbornness of his would affect his performance. Lastly, he mentioned Sharfat's name, and Sharfat already knew what that meant. He pointed his finger at the slave, whose head exploded immediately. The commander then told Enhia and Kia to clean up the mess, while Must had to get back to work. Since his slave was crying and panicking in his lap, Sharfat apologized for scaring her and told the woman to return to his room. Then the commander ordered him to minimize this fraternization with humans. Sharfat asked if it was because it could dilute their bloodline, and the commander emphasized that, more than any other race, elves had a history of mixing their blood with the masters, and all members of the White Knights were submasters because of that. Sharfat lamented that everyone had stopped leveling up except Must, and the commander explained that this was yet another reason. In the last few hundred years, no new master had appeared, and nothing should be done that might mix the blood of the White Knights with that of humans. Sharfat explained he wasn't going to have a child with any human, it was just a bit of fun, because human females always thought they had been chosen by an elf, and then did everything they could to avoid being discarded. Speaking of which, he was already getting tired of that Sasha girl and was thinking about getting rid of her. In any case, the commander stood and informed them that an order regarding Kaido would be issued soon. Even if he had been incompetent, he was still a member of the White Knights, and it was time to resolve the situation. They couldn't afford to stress the queen any further with this matter. At nightfall, Sasha was sleeping in her mansion until she woke up to a loud crash outside. In the middle of the forest, a magic circle was constructing a gigantic structure, and at the top stood Ellie. Sasha saw the structure and wondered if it was the giant tower, where Light wanted to meet her. In the early hours of the following morning, a cart was being driven by an elf. Inside it, 4 enslaved human children were being transported to another place, until the journey was interrupted by the presence of a terrifying creature that made the coachman run away as fast as he could, leaving the children at the mercy of the monster. All around the city, especially inside a tavern, the news spreads freely. The road is swarming with monsters because of that giant tower. A reward was offered to anyone who could provide information about the tower's appearance. But since it was an extremely dangerous mission, most adventurers kept far away from it. While looking at the notice board with one of those flyers, Dark jokes that quite the audience has gathered to watch the show, and Nemamu thinks they might climb ranks soon. Behind them, a pair of elves take an interest in Nemamu's body and invite her to form a party with them for that reason alone, claiming they're both above level 150. In their minds, it's an honor for a human to be summoned by elves to join a team, especially because now she can abandon the costumed brat and the yellow tin can. Gold thinks it's shameful that his companions can't appreciate his beauty, while Nemamu tells the elves to get lost, since Lord Dark is her only master. Dark then says this woman is a valuable member of the team, which leaves her deeply moved. One of the elves, however, tells the kid to shut up and winds up a punch to hit him. But Light reacts quickly with a thunder arrow, which forces the elf to dodge unless he wants to end up roasted. Faced with that display of power, the elf starts thinking these guys might be the Black Motley who don't seem to be limiting themselves to daggers at the moment. After doing that, Dark calls his friends to leave, hoping that this attitude will help rumors spread about the Black Motley's arrival. All he hopes is that everything is fine on Aoyuki's side. Meanwhile, in the forest where the Great Tower was summoned, a trio of elves drags an enslaved child through the woods. They talk about the rumor that high-level creatures are so terrified they aren't even returning to their nests, and that this alone shows the level of danger they accepted by taking the mission. Their leader assures them everything will be fine, since they brought this human to use as bait while they escape. In short, while the child is devoured, they can gather all the information they need to earn the reward. To him, humans are so cheap they're practically disposable trash. Speaking of which, the girl is so exhausted she drops to her knees to breathe, but they immediately order her to stand up and keep walking. Caught up in their distraction, the elves don't notice a creature approaching them, and soon the leader has his head devoured by a stone monster with a serpent-like tail. Then, without hesitation, the other 2 elves are also bitten apart, and the human child kneels down again, waiting for her death. However, instead of eating the girl, the creature simply turns around and leaves without any explanation. The girl thinks she's safe, but as lucky as she is, she immediately runs into a group of 4 random punks who go straight after her. One of them throws a healing potion onto her head so her wounds won't ruin her pretty little face, and she watches all her injuries heal across her body. To her surprise, the other punks argue among themselves about who should get the girl shoes, or a cane to help her walk, or water so she can hydrate. At the same time, one of the punks communicates telepathically with Aoyuki to inform her that the girl has been rescued, and that he'll contact her again when their group reaches the delivery point. Ellie approaches the Catwoman to ask for updates, since it's the first time Aoyuki has controlled so many monsters on the surface. But without speaking a single word, the girl explains with meows that everything is going according to plan, with no complications. Ellie points out that Lord Light ordered them to deal with anyone who gets in their way, but the cat remains completely calm about it. Ellie, however, has her doubts. She believes this mission will be a test of morality for them, because when you have the power to forcefully decide what is right and wrong, you're at risk of committing fatal mistakes. For a moment, the mage thinks about discussing this with the others, but fears that doing so might disrupt their master's intention when giving that order. Aoyuki interrupts her colleague's thoughts to say she overthinks too much. But Ellie argues that they exist precisely to understand, offer support, and reinforce their loyalty to their master. Ayuki, on the other hand, believes they should simply be what Lord Dark wants them to be. In this case, live and fight for him, be cherished by him, serve him, love him, and adore their master being his sword and shield, killing and being killed in the name of that purpose, walking through flames knowing they'll be burned, even if they turn to ashes. All they should think about is how they can be useful to their master. Anything beyond that is unnecessary. Honestly, it bothers Ellie a little that Ayuki is so satisfied being nothing more than Lord Light's pet, just as the beast woman can't understand her colleague after all. The fact that Ellie wants to understand their master's mind makes the cat want to kill her. The mage asks if she's really sure she can do that, and Ayuki replies that the only way to find out is by trying, and if it happens, everyone will learn what happens when one of the 4 nines is lost. With that said, the tension between the two begins to rise but cools off when the punks announce they've arrived at the meeting point, where they're fortunately able to deliver the poor child. She's taken into a small shelter where other children are staying. With that, Ellie leaves, letting Ayuki handle her own matters. After they leave, the punks talk among themselves about how elves can be so cruel, using human children as bait to accomplish their selfish goals. They wonder why anyone would do something so sinister, and one of them says other races have no sense of morality. Their boss cuts them off to remind them that they're leaving at dawn tomorrow, so no sleeping in. When night falls, Sasha can't get the situation involving Light out of her head, especially because the forest has been overrun by monsters above level 1000, and she can't storm that tower on her own. On the other hand, if the White Knights get involved, they'll find out that Light survived, and she'll lose everything. Thinking through the consequences, she decides to deal with this situation herself. And this time she's going to make sure that Brat really ends up dead. The next day, the White Knights also begin mobilizing to intervene in such a serious matter. The Chancellor asks Commander Hardy for his opinion, since the citizens might soon be in danger. Hardy says he's fully aware of the risk the population faces, but he also believes the Chancellor's proposal calls his judgment into question. After all, sending the White Knights to a place where they have no field knowledge is like trying to cut a path through mud with a thin sword. The Chancellor, in turn, has no admiration for the commander's point of view either, and that sparks a wave of tension in the meeting. Since clashes between the two are common, only one person could straighten out this mess, and she's the one who speaks up, favoring Commander Hardy's idea and using her authority as Queen Lif of the Elven Kingdom. She announces that she will increase the reward, so the White Knights will work together with civilians and mercenaries to uncover more information about the giant tower. With that, the meeting ends and everyone leaves the room. As Hardy stands up, the Chancellor calls him Mama's boy, but Hardy ignores him. Afterward, the commander goes to his mother to thank her for the support, since this way he doesn't need to send his men to do the dirty work. The Queen, for her part, has no interest in sending her son into such a tense area, so both of them wash their hands of the matter with this decision. Hardy also accuses the Chancellor of wanting to abolish the monarchy if he ever gets the chance, but Lif is sure nothing bad will happen as long as her son is commander. So it's better for them to focus on the giant tower, which really does have the power to shake the foundations of her reign. After all, that tower may be a sign of the birth of a new Dark Lord, someone who can only be defeated with help from other nations. Hardy also reminds her that if that happens, a hero born among humans will appear. Deep down, the Elven Queen wishes she could wipe out all humans to prevent that possibility, but she also can't risk being mistaken for the Dark Lord himself. Besides, it seems that this hero would also be a master. In that case, Hardy says, the White Knights must eliminate the threat, or the entire Elven Kingdom will be destined for destruction. On that note, the commander asks about the appearance of a supposed potential master some time ago, and Lif explains that the boy was killed once they discovered he wasn't genuine. To be honest, Hardy wishes he had led that mission himself, since humans are pests that spread discord throughout this world and should all be exterminated. After the announcement about the increased reward, many adventurers begin showing up to look for information about the giant tower. When the Black Motley arrives, everyone recognizes them, including the 2 elves who had been humiliated by them the day before. Suddenly, Sasha notices Light's arrival and orders him to show his face. A heavy tension fills the place as Gold and Nemumu get ready to step in, while Light argues that he can't remove his mask, since it was made specifically to hide the burn marks on his face. Not wanting to hear any excuses, the elf slaps him hard enough to knock the mask off. A minute ago, Sasha was walking with 2 level 300 elf subordinates. In theory, those were high levels, but even that wasn't enough to make their superior feel at ease. She knew very well who she might be dealing with. As if that weren't enough, fate made Light cross her path, and since she wasn't expecting it, the elf completely lost her composure and slapped the mask off the human's face just to make sure she was really talking to Light. But the moment she saw that face and noticed the terrible marks in his eyes, she immediately regretted it, as if she hadn't been the one to remove it herself. The woman ordered the boy to put the mask back on. Nemamu was ready to act, but Lord Dark himself ordered his servant to stay behind. Because, disgusted by that horrible mark on the kid's face, the enemy decided to leave on her own. Seeing her walk away, Light celebrated that the fake scar created by the mask had worked perfectly, then praised his two servants for keeping their composure and not attacking the enemy. Gold admitted he had thought that Elf wouldn't be so wicked, and no one knew that better than Light, since the Sasha he once knew was nothing like this one. Speaking of which, he couldn't help but feel frustrated for not having noticed that 3 years earlier, since it could have spared him his near-death experience. Leaving that aside, the trio continued deeper into the forest. While the elves they had made enemies have kept an eye on their every step. Once they saw a chance as their targets entered the woods, the duo went after them. Noticing this, Dark warned in advance that the two would die if they continued the pursuit, but the elves refused to even consider backing down, fueled by their rage. Since that was the case, Light increased his speed to shake the pursuers and managed to gain a good lead until he reached the tree where he was supposed to meet certain people. But since they hadn't arrived yet, the trio chose to wait a bit. To their surprise, the elves insisted and caught up to them, even exhausted, making it clear they wouldn't stop tailing the Abyss warriors so easily. Dark acknowledged their talent for persistence, and Nemamu commented that they would be better off using that talent somewhere else. Gold added that it was ironic how those scoundrels' greatest gift was the very thing that led them to their own end. Full of confidence, the elves claimed that the ones who would die there were their opponents, not them. So Dark called for Mira, and the silence that followed made the elves burst into laughter, assuming it was a bluff. But then Mira emerged from the shadows and devoured the enemies in a grotesque, violent way, as if the two were nothing more than appetizers waiting to be eaten, without a single chance to react. Once it was done, Light apologized for giving their companion extra work, but she assured him she would eat 10,000 elves for her master, though she admitted these two didn't exactly have the best flavor. Gold and Nemamu agreed Mira was certainly reliable, but dear God, the woman was terrifying. Laughing, Mira reminded them that everyone there was a comrade, so there was no reason to be afraid. Speaking of that, another subordinate, Ice Heat, approached with her colleagues and confirmed that the only ones who should be afraid were the enemies, not the allies. With the ability to speak, Locke Suzu's musket agreed completely, and Jack, who had arrived with them, agreed as well. On behalf of the group, Ice Heat apologized for the delay. It wasn't easy to travel without being seen with so many adventurers around. Dark ordered her to lead the way, so Ice Heat told Suzu to do her part. The girl only nodded, so the leader reminded her to behave properly in front of the master. Locke apologized for her. The group continued their journey with Suzu and Locke up front. Gold said he was happy to see Jack again on this mission, and Iron Blood Barricade replied that he would never leave his little brother Light without protection. Hearing the grown man call the master Light, all the women in the group turned to him with demonic expressions. Unbothered, Jack reminded them that they were all comrades, and that there was no need to put Light on a pedestal besides. Light himself didn't care about that. Jack went further, questioning why everyone called the master Lord Dark when it wasn't really necessary, placing the boy at the top all alone. Either way, he promised he wouldn't act so formally toward his little brother. Sensing that things were heating up, Light stepped in and asked Jack to stop provoking them. He then told the girls he was perfectly fine with the way Jack addressed him. But even after supposedly resolving the issue, Dark felt, as they walked, that things were still ridiculously awkward among the group. Changing the subject, he commented to Ice Heat that he never saw her using those gauntlets, not even in the Abyss, and she explained that she had been learning with May how to be a proper maid. Even though it felt strange wearing that gear after so long, Mira told her to take the outfit off already if she was going to be dramatic. But Ice Heat replied she would never act that way beside her master. Watching them, Light found it amusing how everyone got along in such unusual ways. Gold, for example, admired Jack so much he could barely breathe from the nerves of standing next to him. At the same time, Locke was trying to scold Suzu for how she greeted the master, speaking as quietly as possible so no one but her could hear. That difficulty existed because the girl was so shy she didn't speak to anyone except her musket. By the way, Dark asked Nemamu if Suzu was a girl, and she thought so. Since her card said double shooter, the master was curious to know what that meant and planned to ask Ellie about it later. Speaking of Ellie, together with Ayuki, the mage is extremely anxious as she waits for her companions until she finally spots the arrival of the person she loves most in this entire world, Lord Light. As their master approaches, not only does the sorceress run toward him, but Mizuna and Ayuki do as well, both eager to show the Lord the inside of the giant tower. Once inside, Light is impressed by how massive the structure looks from within. Ellie explains that she hasn't activated that feature yet, but the entire interior was built using Abyss Core magic, making any kind of invasion impossible, whether physical or magical. Because of that, Lord Dark will be able to rest comfortably inside without being threatened. And if things get dangerous, Ellie also brought a little pet who can handle the situation. Next, the group goes up to the top floor of the structure, where the Lord's throne room is located. As he climbs the stairs to take his seat, the servants bow before their leader's throne. In front of everyone, Ellie reviews the revenge plan against Sasha. Regarding the plan, Light proposed throwing a grand engagement party for Sasha and a member of the royal family as revenge. She thought it was such a good idea that she took the liberty of making some adjustments. Her idea is to use the elves' most promising force, the White Knights, to test the Abyss' current power. In this case, they would capture those knights to weaken the Elven Kingdom, forcing a surrender so they can extract information about the Masters and the surrounding nations, while the tower serves as their operations base on the surface. In addition, the sorceress prepared a clone of Dark who will handle the dirty work while the real Lord coordinates everything from inside the tower, only needing to appear at decisive moments. Finally, to get the plan started, Ayuki has already pulled some strings to lure Sasha to the giant tower. Meanwhile, a creature from the giant tower walks through the forest, closely watched by Sasha and the adventurers she hired. Both of them know very well that they can't handle such a powerful enemy and fear being spotted, so they request a retreat. But since they've already come this far, the leader refuses to turn back even out of courtesy. Trying to discover where these monsters are coming from, the elf intends to go all the way but ends up agreeing to withdraw when she comes face to face with the great dragon, Ellie's pet. Either way, by that point she already had a good idea of where to find the monster's source, so she decides to return and request intervention from the only elven force capable of dealing with such a threat, the White Knights. With everything planned and achieved, the sorceress's intention is to force a clash between the elves' elite military unit and the forces of the Abyss, both to measure their strength for an eventual war that will happen in the future and to provide quality entertainment for Lord Dark, of course. Without delay, Sasha secures an emergency meeting in the middle of the night to warn them about the presence of extremely powerful creatures deep within the primordial forest, including a dragon, right under the elves' noses. The news hits the High Council like a sledgehammer, and they grow worried about the possibility of their reign collapsing before such a threatening force. By coincidence, the Chancellor had received a similar report from the Black Fools, which sparked a confrontation between him and a certain foolish elf from a certain order of knights, who had decided not to involve the White Knights. Now Sasha is willing to risk her own life to confirm that the crown truly is in danger. With nowhere to run after being cornered, Sir Hardy gives in to the pressure and takes a more direct action, involving the White Knights in the operation once and for all. After the meeting, Sasha asks the Chancellor if she may join the knights in the taking of the giant tower. The leader replies that this was his intention from the very beginning and even highlights how Sasha's dedication to the crown's interests has always been admirable. The truth is that the elf just wants to bury Light once and for all, but of course she didn't say that. Anyway, the Chancellor set only one condition for allowing Sasha to accompany the White Knights. She must borrow something very specific from her father. Otherwise, her presence might become an obstacle for the elves themselves, something the leader hopes Sasha will agree with. Whether she agrees or not, Sasha has a hierarchy to obey. With no other choice, she goes to her father and borrows what her superior requested. At dawn the next day, Commander Hardy gathers a squad to follow Sasha's clues and reach the giant tower. Sharfot asks if she's sure she's coming with them, or if she'll become a problem when things get tough. She assures him she'll do everything as planned. Mikhail defends his wife by reminding them that he's level 500 and knows how to protect himself. In any case, if things go wrong, he'll make sure nothing happens to her. Must admits his envy of Sir Mikhail's patriotism. While Enhia and Kia gossip about how Sasha's presence in the squad involves the Chancellor's political interest in getting his hands on a valuable resource for his reformist faction. Hearing this without the twins noticing, Sharfot prays that politics stays off the battlefield. At least, watching every enemy step through a magic mirror, Ellie and Dark evaluate that everything is going exactly as planned. The closer the moment of revenge gets, the more Dark's hands tremble with excitement. His desire to plant a huge slap on Sasha's face is anything but small. Back in the forest, Sasha nearly falls after tripping, but Mikhail catches his damsel before she hits the ground. Seeing their excessive affection, Sharfot begs the two of them to find a room already. Finally, after a long search, the elves discover the location of the giant tower. With the White Knights drawing near, Ayuki orders 5 monsters to head straight into the forest. Since he doesn't know the exact number of enemies, Hardy decides to keep his squad hidden and wait for the dragon, which is the main target of the mission. Besides, it's time for the adventurers they hired to act as the first measure. So, to attract the monsters, the commander orders fireworks to be launched in the middle of the woods, quickly pulling the creatures toward the noise and clearing the way for the White Knights to enter the tower and kill the dragon. With that done, the leader casts the skill Silence, a magical shield that muffles every sound coming from inside, whether it's breathing or even the elves' heartbeats. This disturbing sensation affects Sasha in a way she didn't expect, since she had never experienced anything like it. Surely, an ordinary person would lose their mind if they had to endure Hardy's rare ability for several minutes. Even so, as she moves forward, all the elf can think about is putting her hands on light again and finishing what she started. Meanwhile, inside the tower, Dark and Ellie show a level of confidence and calm that doesn't match their enemy's anxiety. After crossing the main gate of the giant tower, the White Knights end up falling into a trap on the path, a magic circle that teleports the members to different places, splitting them into small groups. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.